All right, everybody, welcome back. So today we're talking about we're doing the series, the dark side of the criminal justice system series. And today we're talking about one of the issues, right, within the criminal justice system, which is that police officers can lie with impunity. What that means is they can lie without any real true consequences, in my opinion, right? Now, just to make clear, right, from the beginning, I think it's important that I point out, I'm not, my position, right, because I could easily be misunderstood. My content can be misconstrued. I'm not against police officers. I think we need police officers. I think police officers play an important role. I think if I had to take a guess, I would say that most of them out there are good quality people, right? And they went into into that career, into that field, into that profession with good intentions, and they do a good job, right? I would argue that most of them would fall under that. However, I think there are too many that go into it for the wrong reason, and I don't think there's enough. I don't think they have the systems in place to be able to weed out. They have systems, but I don't think they're quality systems. I don't think that they're effective at weeding out all the officers that are they should not be police officers, right? They put everybody else, every other police officer that puts on that badge, that is a quality person, right? That really has good intentions and is doing a good job and it's got integrity. They make those people look bad. So I think that they have to have better systems for weeding them out. So just understand that it's not that I don't believe in the rule of law, that I think that, we should get rid of all or defund all police officers or police departments. That's not what I'm saying, and that's not what I'm arguing, and that's not my position. I'm simply saying there are some bad ones. There's a lot of bad ones, unfortunately, right? Because honestly, even if you were to say, right, and this is just an opinion here, but even if you were to say that 10% of police officers are corrupt, right? They should not be police officers. They're dishonest. They don't have integrity. I think that's too much. 10% is too much. I don't know what that number is, but whatever the number is, it's too high. So my point here, right, we're talking about kind of the dark side of the criminal justice system and the fact that police officers, right, that this corrupt percentage, right, and we'll just say it's 10% for the sake of discussion, for the sake of this conversation, just so we have a number. We're saying that this 10% that's out there, right, that should not be police officers, that they're able to lie and they're able to operate without integrity, and they're able to really destroy lives, right? Just so you understand, it's pretty profound. They get to destroy lives, and it's not just when they shoot and kill somebody or choke somebody that does not need to be choked to death, but it also has to do with when they lie, when somebody's been charged, when somebody's been arrested, right? A police officer can plant evidence, right? Police officer can lie about what he heard or what somebody told them. He can manipulate witnesses, right? What I'm saying by that, by manipulate witnesses, right? And it's totally legal, right? But it's been done. If you watch enough of these 2020 shows or Dateline shows, and I always refer to these, by the way, because I think that's a good point of reference for most people, because for me, like, I know this not just because of those shows, right? Because I've studied that as well, but also because if you watch my content, I've read thousands and thousands of cases, thousands of them, and I've helped many people out, right? While I was incarcerated, I helped a lot of people out, and I saw the corruption. I saw the stuff that was done by certain police officers that was just unethical. It was dishonest, just downright corrupt. You know what I mean? Like, and the reason that I say, right, that police officers can get away with this, right? They get to do this with impunity is for the reasons that I'll be discussing with you right now. So before I get into that, one thing that I also like to point out, and I think it's important, is that if, for example, right, if somebody gets charged, let's say you get charged with something and you go to trial, and it's one of those cases where, it's circumstantial evidence, meaning there is no direct evidence of your guilt. It's all based on circumstances or whatever. And let's say that, while you were arrested, and these are very common, the circumstantial type of cases, right? Sometimes there is no direct evidence of proof. It's just kind of circumstances and they put it all together. And you're innocent, right? But you get arrested. And when you get arrested, right, the officer, initially shows up. He asks you a bunch of questions. And it's one of these 10%ers, right? We're talking about one of these 10%ers. That's what we're going to call them, just to make it easy here. And he alleges, right? Let's say at trial, he alleges that when he arrested you, you said something, but it's not recorded, right? That you said something to him, and you're saying, no, I didn't say that to him. That's not accurate. What I said was this. So just, generally speaking, right? When you go to trial, they already are going in with way more credibility. So the jury, right? Because the jury's going to decide whether you're guilty or not. The jury has to weigh what you're saying against what he's saying. And chances are, because of the respect that we generally have for police officers, which we should, but because of the respect, these 10%ers get to leverage that. You know what I mean? And you're not going to question them as much. And the jury's not going to question them. The jury's going to believe what they're saying more likely than not. Than they're going to believe what you're saying, right? If there's a conflict between what they're saying, what you're saying, chances are they're going to believe them. Same thing with the judge. Same thing with investigators, right? Just generally speaking, right? If there are any other investigators that are involved, if there's experts involved, right? Experts have to sometimes look at when it's cases that are circumstantial. Experts have to also sometimes look at like the evidence, and then they have to take what people say into account. And generally speaking, a police officer's word is going to have more weight than your word, right? So it's important that we have quality police officer, right? That we get rid of these 10%ers. So anyways, so let's get into this. So I said, so they get away with being corrupt, and it's because, right? So let's start with this part of it. So when it comes to suing a police officer, it's very difficult, right? Despite what you might have seen on TV and on the media and all that, it's very difficult. The courts, right, over the years, over the decades and all that, maybe even longer than decades, maybe over the last couple hundred years or whatever, they've slowly have made it like they've keep making decisions, right, court decisions that become kind of the standard, right, going forward, to make it even more difficult and more difficult and more difficult to sue somebody. So whenever you do see a case where somebody, a police officer gets sued and he gets held accountable, right, it's the exception. It's the exception. It's not the rule. It's very difficult. They go out of their way to make it difficult. They have all these different immunities, and you have to be able to show an exception within an exception of an exception of an exception to try to break that immunity, right? I'm exaggerating here, but my point is it's very difficult, first off, to sue them. So that's number one. Number two is that once they do get sued, right? So whenever somebody does get, like an officer does get criminal charges as well, that's different, right? When they get criminal charges, those guys or gals are being held accountable. Not to the same degree that you and I would be held accountable, because that's another little thing I wasn't planning on discussing. But if you commit manslaughter, right? If you do a certain thing, all the facts are the same, right? Relatively the same. You'll be held, you know what I mean, more accountable than they will, right? They are cut some slack because they're police officers. They'll get cut some slack with regard to the charges that they get. They'll also be they cut them some slack with regard to the sentencing after they're actually convicted. So even if an ordinary person gets convicted of, for example, manslaughter, right? An ordinary person might do X number of years. Well, police officer getting convicted of manslaughter won't do the same number of years. Generally speaking, I'm sure there's some exceptions, but generally speaking, they don't do as much time. But those are the ones that are actually held accountable, right? So in my opinion, right? Criminal charges obviously destroys their career. They're no longer a police officer. They no longer get to put on that uniform. But then on the other side of it, you have these other police officers that all you can do is just go after them civilly, right? And for the ones that you're in, hypothetically, right? Let's say you do win. Let's say you are able to jump through all these hoops and find the exceptions and kind of navigate the system, and you're able to hold them accountable, right? Big if, right? Big if. But let's say you do that, right? And then you hold them accountable. Well, let's say that you get a settlement or a judgment, whatever it is, right? For, I don't know, $10 million. Guess who pays for that? No one ever talks about this, but it's not the police officer. He doesn't pay for that. This corrupt police officer that now is being held accountable, right, civilly, does not have to pay that. It's the taxpayers. It's the taxpayers that have to pay for that. There should be some level of financial responsibility that officer should shoulder, in my opinion, right? I think that would be part of the solution. If you started holding police officers responsible for financially, right? For, even if you said it was only 10% of whatever settlement, right? So for example, in a case where, civilly, you're able to win and you're able to get, I don't know, $1 million, right? If they were responsible for coming up with 10% of that, and then there's always, an insurance policy or whatever, or the state covers it, whoever it is that covers the rest of the 90%, that's fine. But if you made the police officer personally liable for 10%, I think it would really have a huge impact, right? Because if they have if they have homes, or if they have, money set aside, or, whatever it is, like, it's all on the line. So they have to think about it twice before they go and commit a real corrupt act and right, and become a 10%er, right? And put everybody to shame and destroy lives, right? Because a police officer, like once again, I was saying a moment ago, I didn't elaborate on this, but they can destroy somebody's life by simply lying, right? And then it leads to somebody getting convicted. And if it's a minor crime, what's a few years? You still destroyed their life and it turned everything upside down. But what if it's a life sentence? You know, what if they're lying and it's something where, you know, the person could spend 20, 30, 40 years in prison? I mean, that's almost as bad, if not worse, in some ways, arguably worse than if they just took a gun out and decided to shoot somebody in cold blood. Somebody that did not deserve it, right? Just in cold blood. It's the same thing. Like, you just destroyed their entire lives. And then you just think about the impact on all of that person's family, their neighbors, their society, their community, everything. I mean, the ripple effect is crazy, right? So I think it's very serious. It's something that needs to be taken serious. And I think they need to be held accountable. And at this point, the way it stands now, they pay nothing. It all is just simply the taxpayers end up paying for it. And I don't think that that's the way that it should be. So anyways, so that's why when I say that they don't actually end up paying for their consequences, or they don't pay for their actions, right? So anyways, I hope that was helpful. It's just another kind of a dark side of the criminal justice system, right? I think the solution is relatively easy. You know, the police officers that are quality people, right, that go into it for the right reasons, that are doing their job with integrity, I don't think they have to worry about this, right? If you implemented this, if you said, hey, from now on, you have to pay 10% of whatever settlement. If you remove some of the immunity, right, that would be another one, to start removing some of these immunity, make it easier for people to sue them. I don't think they have anything to worry about, right? The ones that operate with integrity, the ones that would have something to worry about would be the ones that are going into it for the wrong reasons. And it's funny because, you know, something I'll share with you guys, one last story, just a little story before I finish this video off. So while I was incarcerated, I met this guy, right? He was in his late 40s, early 50s. He was a white supremacist, and surprisingly, right, we became pretty good friends. And he was a career criminal, right, had been in and out since he was a youngster, right, before he was 18, and then ended up in prison, you know, before he was in, like, you know, juvenile halls or whatever, and then he ended up in prison, you know, at 18, and had been in and out his whole life, right, his whole life. And he told me, he says, you know, knowing what I know now, right, he says, right, because he likes danger, he likes the adrenaline rush, and he likes doing things. He likes doing legal things, right? He says, knowing what I know now, and the context-wise, we were talking about some of the corruption, right, within police departments. He says, I would have just became a police officer. I wish I would have known this. I would have just became a police officer, and then I would have been able to do everything that I'm doing now as a criminal. I've probably gotten away with it. That was his belief, right? Whether or not that's true, whether or not you agree, that's a whole different thing. I don't necessarily agree with that 100%. But I saw his point. I understood, right? Because he was talking about going out and shooting people and you know what I mean? Because this guy was crazy. I mean, he had done some pretty crazy stuff. But I could see where he was coming from, right? Because he's seeing all the stuff that they get away with, right? Police officers get away with, and they get to do this with impunity, right? So anyways, we got to get rid of those 10%ers. We got to hold police officers and departments a little more accountable to weed out all the bad ones so that they don't give everybody else a bad name. So anyways, I hope this was helpful. I hope this was useful, and I hope you understood where I'm coming from. It's not from I'm not coming from a place of hatred or anger towards all police officers. I hope that was clear. Anyways, see you guys in my next video. I'm not an attorney, and this is not legal advice.